Hey everybody, you've probably heard of the Z8 from Nikon, a new full-frame mirrorless camera, the baby Z9 I think they call it. Well, this is not a review of that camera. That's already been done by better people than me. What I'm going to do today is tell you whether or not this camera meets the criteria for me to call it a good macro camera. If you're into macro photography, stick around. So it's true that the question, is this a great camera, often will also answer that, is this a great macro camera question, but not always. There are some great cameras that do not make good macro cameras. So what I'm going to do today is get into the three sets of criteria that I use to determine whether or not a given camera is going to work for me as a macro photographer. I use a camera in three ways. I use it in my lab, or I use it in the field, or I use it in both places. Now, when I'm buying a camera or looking at a camera, I'm looking at it as a camera I'm going to use in one of those situations. So I developed three separate sets of criteria that I use to go through the camera and make sure that I'm going to be happy with the purchase. I would probably want to use this Z8 mostly in the field, but also in the lab, not as much. When I bought the D850, it was as a field macro camera, so they are the criteria that I checked. When I bought my D7500 and every other Nikon I've ever bought, it was to use in the lab. And when I was using it there, I had a different set of criteria, and we're going to go over both of those sets, as well as a set of criteria that I use for any camera that I'm going to buy. So we'll start out by talking about that first set of criteria. All three of these, by the way, have a mnemonic, a word that you'll remember that spells out the criteria that you're going to look for. You'll remember the words, you won't remember the criteria, but that's okay. So to determine whether any camera is something I want to buy, it has to be sharp, S-H-A-R-P. The first criteria is support. The camera has to have the support of the company that makes it. If this is an older camera that is maybe not actively supported by the company, I probably won't buy it. If it's a camera that's being sold by a company that has a reputation for not giving good support, I probably won't buy it. The only time I've had an issue with support and Nikon was one time several years ago. I made a video about it and I was wrong. They were right, I was wrong. So I have no issues with support at Nikon. The second criteria is history. Does the company have a history with macro photography? Is this their first camera that people are buying to use for macro? Have they just got one macro lens, or they've just announced the release next month of a macro lens? If you don't have all the moving parts for a good macro camera, you're not going to have a history. The company's not going to get a reputation for being a macro company like Nikon does. Nikon has a long storied history as being a technical camera company, and macro is no exception to that. The third criteria is the camera has to have accessories that are accessible. Meaning if the camera is brand new and it doesn't yet have a battery grip or adapters for the new mount or whatever accessories you might need to fully equip your camera for use in macro, I'm not going to buy it. Sometimes it's a good idea to wait a few months until everything that you're going to need is available. Because there's nothing more frustrating to have a beautiful new camera that you can't use because the adapter for the lenses you have isn't ready yet. Criteria number 4 and number 5 are almost the same. 4 is R, that's resale value. Some cameras are going to hold their value well enough to where when it comes time to trade in, you're going to get a lot of value from that camera, especially a newer model well taken care of. A camera like the D850, even though it has a lifetime expectancy given the shutter, and the number of shutter activations is certainly going to make a difference, but it still has a high resale value compared to other cameras. Entry-level cameras generally have no resale value. That ties in with the last criteria, P, and that is for the price. Anybody who knows how much money they have is concerned about the price of their next camera purchase. So this isn't for people who don't know how much money they have. They can buy whatever they want. I make every effort to stay within my budget when I'm buying a camera. The only exception to that rule was when I bought the D850, and it turned out to be the best gamble I ever made. I absolutely love that camera, but price is important. Pay attention to it, and there's very little point spending so much on your camera that you can't afford but the cheapest macro lens to put on it. Then you might as well have not bothered. Okay, that's for all cameras. Let's talk now specifically about the cameras that we're going to use in the lab. And as an example, my studio cameras are lower level or mid-tier DSLR cameras like the D7500. The D7500 is a nice camera. It is not quite as capable in any respect as the D850, and certainly miles from the Z8. But it is an almost perfect camera for what I use it for. When I buy a camera body to use primarily in the studio, it has to be fantastic. F is for flash ready. Now that in general means the camera needs to be capable of off-camera flash activation immediately right out of the box. There are some cameras that are not, mostly entry-level DSLRs. So I would need to make absolutely sure that any camera that I had would work with the off-camera flash system that I'm currently using. The second criteria is accuracy, and I'm talking here about the sensor. And I'm including this more out of historical interest than anything else, and it may still be a reasonable thing to consider if you're buying a used camera. A modern CMOS sensor is crucial to get accurate, balanced images that you're going to be able to stack. If you aren't getting good pictures out of your camera, they're not going to stack well. The third criteria, N, is noiseless. Now, by that, I'm not talking about the sensor, I'm talking about the actual noise your camera makes. If you're shooting with a DSLR and your camera does not have any way for you to set it in a mirror-up mode, you have a noisy camera that is going to interfere with your images because it's going to set up all kinds of vibration. I would avoid those cameras. If you do have a DSLR and it does have mirror-up like the Nikon D7500 and the 850, then you're in better shape, but you're still not in the clear. If you have a mirrorless camera, then make sure that you have a mirrorless camera that is full-time electronic shutter. That means it doesn't have a mechanical shutter and there is nothing moving back and forth in front of the sensor. It's purely electronic. That's going to give you the least noise, the least vibration. The next criteria is tetherable. And again, this is something that is going to be included in any camera you buy today, especially any mirrorless camera. But if you're buying an older camera, a DSLR, it might not be tetherable. There are several cameras that I've seen that you can't tether. Some of the entry-level Nikons were not tetherable. These days, you would be hard-pressed to find any mirrorless camera, even a compact one, that doesn't have the ability to tether somehow. The Z8, for example, has 2 USB-C ports as well as an HDMI out, so it can tether. Even if you have to use some kind of an intermediary dongle, if you can't tether, and that is the way you shoot your macro in the studio, then don't buy the camera. The next criteria is storage. To understand why I include storage as a criteria, I do a lot of high magnification stuff, and when I'm up over 20 times magnification, when I'm shooting at 50 times magnification, I may have 800, 900, 1,000 individual full frame images in a stack. If you don't have a big card that writes fast, you're going to end up with problems. You're going to end up filling the card before you're finished with your shot, and that is problematic. So if you're in the studio, the storage is as important as it will be outdoors when you're shooting in burst mode. So don't skimp on it. If you can buy a camera with 2 card slots, do so. My D7500 doesn't. In fact, the largest card that I have for my D7500 is only 128 gigabytes, which would have been a crazy thing to say even 3 years ago, that you'd have a card that big. Even the Z8 would be second choice when it comes to storage from the Z9. I would much rather have 2 CF Express slots than the 1 CF Express and 1 SD. My D7500 has 1 SD slot. As much as I love the camera, it probably wouldn't be the highest ranking camera for me right now. I shoot more full frame in the lab than I used to, and I shoot more high magnification than I used to. So both of those would make the D7500 a less attractive choice. Next up, T, tough. Whatever you're using in the studio, just like out in the field, it needs to be tough. It needs to be a good camera. There's probably no need to have a weather sealed camera, and you can save a little bit of money by going a bit further down the roster of cameras from the flagship, but still having a camera that is very well made. Your cameras in the studio get a lot of bashing around. I mean, mine do. I'm terribly careful with my cameras, but when you have all of that equipment in such a confined space and you're moving things around, these cameras do take a beating. The second to last criteria is intuitive. Having a camera with intuitive setup and use is really important to me. I don't like to have to look at the camera when I'm setting up a shot in the studio. I do it by feel because all of the controls make perfect sense to me. They're laid out well. I never have to go into the menus. Cameras that require me to use a menu for anything, like the old Sonys used to, I have no time for them. They are counterintuitive and they just add to my workload. So a camera that is all buttons and all sensible is preferred. The last criteria is compatible. In macro photography, we use an endless river of accessories and devices. We use stack shots, we use macros, we use all kinds of equipment that needs to play with our camera. And if we don't have the right connections to make them compatible, if we don't have a camera that can take the signal from a stack shot and fire the flashes, then we have a problem. So check that out before you buy your camera. Make sure that everything you're planning to use, your flash system, your rails, everything is going to work with that camera. So if you have found a sharp camera that's also fantastic, get it for your studio. It'll be a good match. But if you want to take it out in the field, it also needs to be priceless. Do you think I made these up? I did make them up. And what do I mean, pray tell, by priceless? P, it needs to be protected from the elements. It needs to be weather sealed, and so do your lenses. You are outdoors doing macro in the field. Your camera has to be protected against dust and dirt and water, particularly water. If you're outdoors doing macro and half of your attention is spent looking at the horizon, wondering whether or not you're going to get caught in a rainstorm this afternoon, you are never fully into your macro and your pictures are going to suffer. Seriously, get a camera that it wouldn't make any difference if you got caught in a downpour. It has taken me years to get used to that concept with the D850, but I am there now. I just don't worry. I've been caught in enough rainstorms with it and it still works to trust now that the camera will stay sealed. By the way, the various ports on these new cameras and how they are covered, that is an important part of weather sealing. Your camera may well be sealed around all of the important places like the flange, but it also needs to be sealed around the accessory ports. In the best possible scenario, every port will have its own door that will close completely. The Z8 does have this one door that opens up to reveal both the data and the power port, the two USB-Cs for this camera. I would prefer that it had two doors, one for each port. That really does make a difference to me, because if you open this to put on an accessory, a USB accessory, and it's raining, you are exposing the unused port to the rain unnecessarily. So it's always better if you can limit the exposure during inclement weather. So having a good sealed, protected camera is key. Number two, responsive. This is all about autofocus. Now, I don't use, or haven't historically used, a lot of autofocus in my macro. I use it sometimes to initially acquire a subject, and then I immediately switch to manual, which on a camera like the D850 you can do without pressing any buttons. As soon as you touch the focus ring, you're back in control of the focus. The same on the Z8. But the Z8 is a much better camera when it comes to focus. For one thing, it doesn't group the focus points in the center of the field like the D850 does. The focus points go all the way to the edges of the field. So I can compose a shot exactly the way I want it. I can have my ladybird in the top left-hand corner of the frame and focus on it and get it in perfect focus without having to recompose the shot. That is what I call a responsive camera, and having that in the field is really key for me to composing interesting shots in the fraction of a second that you have to think about it. I've never used anything as responsive as this Z8. Criteria number three, you'll remember from Fantastic, is intuitive. If the camera that you're using doesn't make sense, if the buttons are in weird places or do weird things, you're not going to enjoy using the camera, and you're not going to get good with the camera. You don't want to ever have to think about what your fingers are doing when you're using a camera in the field when you're shooting macro. That has to be second nature. By the time you're taking your $4,000 camera out in the field to do macro, your fingers need to know where everything is, and they need to make sense. If the controls on your camera are intuitive, if they make sense where they are, then when you're using them, you will be focused entirely on what you're photographing and not where your fingers are. I have used plenty of counterintuitive cameras that are frustrating as all get out. You'll eventually learn even those, but you're a lot better off if all of the buttons make good sense to you right out of the box. One thing they've done with this camera that I absolutely love is they have put this shooting mode button right in the best possible place for me to get to it, which allows me to shoot from single shot to slow burst mode to fast burst mode very, very quickly. Press this button and dial with the right hand, and you can go from shooting single shots to slow mode to high burst mode. That is one of the sexiest sounds in photography. That's what 20 frames per second sounds like. Happy, happy, joy, joy. The C in priceless is for card slot redundancy. I made that up. I won't belabor the point. The C is for card slot redundancy. It just means get a camera with 2 card slots, preferably 2 fast ones. If not that, a fast one and a slower one. If not that, 2 slow ones. But I would not use a single SD card camera in the field these days. There are better options than that. The next criteria is E for ease of use. A camera being easy to use is subtly different from a camera being intuitive to use. By intuitive, I mean it's easy to understand. It makes sense where everything is and how it works. Ease of use is everything about the camera is uncomplicated and straightforward to actually execute. For example, an easy-to-use camera will have a very simple-to-operate articulating screen, or its hot shoe will accept the accessories without any fiddling around. The doors will open easily and close easily. You won't have to press buttons to remove cards and so on and so forth. Having a camera that's easy to use makes all the difference when time is of the essence, as it is in field macro, where you only have a few seconds to get the shot. You will define what easy to use means for you. You already know from your own camera. You know that there are some things that are not as easy to use as you would like. Finding ways to improve upon those are an important criteria in finding the perfect field camera. This Z8 is the easiest camera to use I've ever encountered. It is not only intuitive in that it's easy to understand the layout and how everything works together, it's just easy to use right out of the box. I had started using this in the worst possible conditions and was able to get lots of decent pictures with it. In good conditions, you can knock it out of the park. A few of the specifics about the Z8 that make it easy to use are the button positions that we've already talked about, the fact that the buttons are large, tactile, and lit so that you can see them. The joystick is much more prominent and has a more aggressive knurling on it than the joystick on the D850. Much easier to feel your way around in low light or when you're paying attention to other things. The screen articulates very easily and very smoothly. It's not something that you have to think about while you're setting up. You can just do it in an instant and be ready to shoot. I love the fact that this screen articulates in 2 dimensions. Changing focus modes, this button is a big improvement. Bottom line is, the Z8 is incredibly easy to use. I mean, if you've used any Nikon camera in the past, you'll love this. Lagless is L. And by lagless, I'm talking about the EVF. The EVF does not have the usual half second of lag time between taking a picture and seeing it in the EVF. The reason is the sensor is able to write to both the card and the EVF at the same time because there are 2 CMOS sensors in here. They're operating in parallel. So half the data is going straight to your eye, half the data is going straight to the card. That also explains why there's no blackout when you're shooting in burst mode. It's because it can continue to feed information to your eye while it's writing to the card. That's a big improvement. If you can find a camera that is lagless for the field, use it. Doesn't matter in the studio. It can lag all day long. You're not even looking at it in the studio. It's taking the pictures for you, so I wouldn't worry about it. But in the field, lagless. E, ergonomic. A camera that you are going to carry around in the field for half a day or all night needs to be comfortable. If it's not comfortable, you aren't going to want to take it with you. If it's cramping your hand because it's too small, if it's falling out of your grip because it's too big, or if it's too heavy, or if it's out of balance, you won't use it. So get a camera that fits your hand. Now, there is no camera that has been made yet that fits my hand better than the D850. This is the closest I have come yet. It takes my full hand, including my pinky, and comfortably. It's got a nice depression in the side by the card door, which holds my thumb. There's very little about the ergonomics of this camera I don't like. The balance with this lens is fantastic. I would want to try this camera with the 200 f4. That would be a lens that I would most likely have on my camera all the time out in the field. And the 200 f4 would I think, test this camera's balance a little bit because it is such a light setup with this all plastic lens. Getting a camera that's comfortable to hold, isn't giving you hand cramps, and doesn't require you to use a strap if you don't like using them. And ergonomics doesn't just mean the grip, it also means the eyepiece. I much prefer the round eyepieces of the flagship Nikons to the little square ones. This allows me to get a little bit further back from the camera sometimes when I want to use my other eye for something. One of the reasons I didn't switch to mirrorless when everybody else did was the best cameras out then were ergonomically appalling for me. They had very small hand grips here that were incredibly uncomfortable to use. Compare this camera to the Fuji X-T2 that I have. that camera is unusable in the field because of its small and insubstantial right-hand grip. I would drop it trying to use it. So this, on the other hand, is close to perfect. We only have two S's left. The first is silent. I presume that your next field macro camera is going to be mirrorless, because I presume that whatever camera you're buying next will probably be mirrorless. If that is the case, get one that has full-time electronic shutter. One of the drawbacks of a full-time electronic shutter is a little more noise and a little lower dynamic range, but it's very trivial compared to the advantage of being able to have your camera shoot silently. It's true that I don't always shoot silently, but there are times in macro when you have a skittish subject and you're in really, really close that you want to be able to shoot silent. Or if you're using this camera to shoot weddings, you want it to shoot silent. Being able to shoot completely silent, not having any mechanical shutter at all, makes a big difference. And lastly, and definitely not leastly, S, speedy. If you're going to buy a camera to use in the field, buy a camera that is fast. By fast, I mean it has a high burst rate. If you're buying a mirrorless camera, you'll be able to get one that has very high frame rates. If you're shooting JPEGs, you'll get one that can shoot 60 or more frames a second. But if, like me, you shoot RAW in the field, get a camera that can handle frame rates of 20 or more. This camera shoots 20 frames per second in RAW, and it will shoot 2,000 frames before it hits a buffer. Having a really high burst rate became invaluable for me. It's not something I would use all the time. In fact, it's not my preference to use it, but when I was using it on a very windy day the other day, it just proved invaluable in capturing shots I otherwise would have missed. So a very high burst rate is a very nice feature to have, and 20 frames per second is wonderful. Speedy also means the ability to shoot very high frame rate video if you want to. So the perfect macro camera will have a high stills frame rate as well as a high video frame rate. And they are the criteria that I use when I'm looking at cameras. Now, to be honest, these days, most cameras are going to hit all of these criteria, even at the fairly basic level of camera. But there are a few of these areas where you're going to need to get into a slightly better camera to get the feature that I talked about. And I didn't put them in these lists unless they were important. Seeing as this video is largely about the Z8, I wanted to compare what the Z8 had on this checklist compared to what my other cameras have. The criteria change over time. As cameras get better, the criteria change. So it's hardly surprising that there are some of the criteria that my current cameras no longer meet. They met them back when I bought the cameras. This meets them all today, but it probably won't in 3 years. I ran through these same criteria for all my other cameras, and the ones I'm currently using most failed on several things. The D850 failed on noiselessness and compatibility. It's hard to put on the bellows is why. It is not particularly responsive when it comes to autofocus. It's not exactly easy to use. It has a learning curve, the D850, so it lost points there. It's not silent and it's not speedy. So my D850 would not compete with the Z8 today as a field camera. As a studio camera, the D7500 lost on having no resale value. It's not noiseless. It's not storage rich. It's not particularly responsive, and it's neither ergonomic, silent, or speedy. So my D7500 would not stand a chance of being chosen if it was in the running with a camera like the Z8. The Z8, of course, had checks all the way down, with one exception. Do you think you can guess what that is? There was one criteria I forgot to mention. It was the second A in fantastic, and it was actually the only criteria that the Z8 failed on. That was affordability. I don't think a $4,000 camera is particularly affordable. But that is, I suppose, a fairly subjective opinion. When you compare it to other cameras that are equipped like this, it's probably a steal. This checklist is for you to use. And if a $4,000 camera is not affordable for you, it doesn't get a check mark, period. It doesn't matter whether it's affordable for everybody else. So I thought that that was pushing it. That's a lot of money to spend on a camera body. Does that mean I'm not going to get one? Absolutely not. The D850 wasn't affordable either. Believe me, and it was close to $4,000 when I bought it. The D850, by the way, is selling now for $2,500. The Z7 II is selling for $2,500. The Z9, on the other hand, is selling for almost $6,000. So affordable is a subjective thing. So how would I sum this up? I would say that without any fear of contradiction, that the Z8 is one of the most capable, fun, usable, reliable cameras for macro photography, either in the field or in the studio, that I've ever encountered. I would go a step further and say that this is the first Nikon camera that is a perfect score for studio and outdoors. You could use it for both. Understand that in saying that the Z8 is highly recommended and that it does everything I need a macro camera to do, I am not saying that the OM1, Canon R7, the Canon R3, or the Sony Alpha, I'm not saying that any one of those cameras is not equally capable. I don't know, I haven't used them. The criteria I gave will work for any camera. If you use these criteria, you will avoid some of the pitfalls in buying a new camera. This camera is as close to a perfect macro camera, either in the studio or in the field, that you're ever likely to run into. At least until they invent something better, which will probably mean about a week from now. If this was helpful, please like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you're going to go buy a Z8, go buy it using one of my affiliate links, please, because you don't pay any more, but I get paid a little bit, and that would be good. Every little bit is going to get me a little bit closer to having one of these of my own. That would be nice. Coming up next, the 105. After a week of use, my thoughts on that, followed by a discussion of Nikon's confused approach to flash and the R1C1. See you again soon. Take care. Thanks for watching.